order.
I literally took Dick Gomes by the top of the hair on the back of his neck and let him out of his shop and said, "You got to be here in 10 minutes." He should be in a minute.
Okay. I'll call the meeting to order, and we do have an agenda here. First order of business is addressed here as public comment. I don't know if anybody would have anything they want to offer before we get underway. Any thoughts, any ideas, anything happening? Matt, maybe you want to bring people up to date.
If I could. As Paul knows, we're applying for the Community Development Project grant. And just basically what we're talking about, I was at a training session in Boston about this. We're just going for sidewalks. There are also other grants that go for housing and for AIDS and everything. Our application is going to be large, but it's very basic. It's sidewalks. And one is an existing sidewalk, and the other was the one from Bank Street to Saquatucket. I was just telling Larry, I was very encouraged with the session up there. That was Mark. What he wants from us is he wants to preview my application before we actually submit it. He's helping us. The main thing I'm pushing for is ADA, because this grant requires you completed an ADA self-assessment into transition, which we just completed. And I guess towns all over the country are having a hell of a time getting towns to comply with it because it costs money. We had the grant that I applied for the consultant and won that. Now we're going for a grant to pay for the transition for the municipal changes. There's like 270 minor things. They're mainly signage and things like that. What that do, it'll make the town totally compliant. But we're in that process, and that's the minimum requirement they want in there. It's right in the second thing, that you have to have completed this. Well, most of the towns haven't. So I feel pretty good about it. Now what I'm doing is essentially just applying for the money. Basically all I'm saying is 2 sidewalks, 2 street lights here, 1 street light down by the health center. Your committee is going to figure out the other incidents of how you work with things. I don't want to get into that right now. So I'm doing a little bit backwards, getting the money first. Now we've already got $250,000 that was approved by town meeting for down Route 28. So that would add to it, but I'll be glad to give you progress reports as we go through it. We're going to try and get the application in a month early. I'm trying to get it in this month.
And you expect to hear what time, when, maybe?
January, end of January, 1st of March.
Okay.
The tricky thing about it, it has to be a ready-to-go project. You've got 18 months to use the money and build it.
Matt, is that, that's $250,000 just for the sidewalks?
No.
Is that?
$250,000 that I applied for is strictly for the municipal buildings to
Okay,
make them ADA compliant.
okay,
What I'm applying for is $1 million, which would be combined with the $250,000 that the town has already appropriated for the 2 sidewalks and 3 streetlights.
so it's both Harwich Center and Harwich Port?
Harwich Port and Harwich Center, yeah. We're calling the Harwich Center one the Community Center to the Cultural Center,
Okay.
and we're calling the Harwich Port one Bank Street to Saquatucket.
Okey-dokey.
Thanks, Matt.
Yeah, very good.
The Bank Street to Saquatucket, are we actually, is there a possibility that we're going to be able to make that all the way through?
Actually, it'll go up to, what's the road that takes you to Red River Beach?
Red
Go to Neal Road.
Really?
Julian Road, and it'll include a boardwalk bridge over a culvert by the crack.
That's great. Thank you.
Okay, let me first, before we get into the business of the meeting here, I'll introduce myself as kind of the acting chairman here. I'd like to introduce the members of the committee if they want to Want me to-
Okay, Jenny Hewitt, I'm serving as the chair. Yay! I was excited for the opportunity. And by the way, there's a sign-in sheet going around, so if you could fill that out, that would be helpful. And then I'll update our email list and add any new people.
Good,
Yep.
thanks.
I'm intentionally a part of the committee, but actually not sworn in yet, so I won't be voting tonight. But I'm Greg Winston, and I'm working with the organization because I think we've got something. I think we can make it work this time, and I'm very enthusiastic. So
I'm Lane Meehan. I am sworn in.
I know you say that.
And I own both Cape Cod Tile Works and have a house on Parallel Street, so I have a very vested interest in Harwich Center.
As do I. Dan Wolf, I live up on Main Street for the last 33 years, and excited about what we're working on here.
I'm Lee Cooper, Harwich DPW, and I owe Paul a small favor, and that's why I'm sitting here.
Okay, thanks. Those are folks who are formal members of the committee. I'm planning to approach the selectmen and seek some alternate members as well, so that can help us a little bit with our quorum from time to time. But I also want to introduce some folks in the audience. At the last meeting, there was a very strong plea made that we need to make a stronger effort in terms of contacting and involving stakeholders, the people who live, work in Harwich Center, or at least are operators of various businesses in Harwich, and Harwich Center in particular. So we've asked some folks to join us tonight, which hopefully they'll become active members of our group as well. Currently, we kind of operate with a fairly loose network, but we have about 15 or 20 folks that have indicated interest in assisting us in various ways at some point. We'll be down to actually doing some assignments, I think, and particular tasks, and to have the folks on hand that are willing and have time to do that kind of thing is important. But also, it's going to be important that we have people who are involved specifically with the properties that we're dealing with in Harwich Center. Last week, just to bring some folks up to date that weren't here, we've stressed the fact that, well, let me just point out that years ago, my mother had a program that she did with slides and so forth, talking and showing the changes that have occurred in Harwich Center. What to me stands out in those photographs that have taken, she didn't take the ones in 1898, but she made copies of the ones taken then. But she did take ones in the 50s, some in the 60s, some in the 80s, and it shows sort of a bit of a transition. But as I've said to some people, the amazing thing about those pictures are that while you think back to the time that this was an active village, there was sort of a sense that there was a real charm and an attraction. But in reality, those pictures show that the center was kind of unattractive. There were buildings, and there were cars, and there were utility poles and everything else. But the idea of a real charm in terms of design or characteristics is kind of lacking. What was present back then, which is very vivid in the pictures, is a very active and vibrant community. People lived there, people worked there, people shopped there, and it was really the activity of the village that made it its charmingness. And that's, I feel, the focus of our organization here, is to try to rekindle that lifeblood in the town. And in some ways, work like Matt's doing on the sidewalks and other beautification steps that will come along. Some of it involves economic stimulus and economic growth and so forth. So we're we're looking for direction. We're looking for developing priorities and points that people can bring to the equation, experiences that they have. So we're very much in the formative stages at this point. Something else I was going to mention, but it's my age is showing
Just stop
here.
that. You do that every time.
Yeah.
Excuse me.
But I would like to at least just point out that I asked Representative Gomes and her husband Dick. Dick runs a business here in Harwich. Shirley is our, as you know, former state representative. We heavily weighted with the former members of the Great and General Court, but I tend to feel that that's important in terms of contacts and experiences that they've had. John Eldridge is here. We asked John to come. He's a representative, or at least a member of the Masonic Lodge, and I know what I now was going to say, was that in that first meeting I pointed out that there are about 5 buildings or so in Harwich Center that are very much in play. By that I mean they're sort of in transition or could be very important building blocks. One of them is the Masonic Hall, which has been a fortress there for decades, and used to house the back in my day, the post office and Brett's dry goods store. Then it became Bates's Hardware, and then various transitions on the ground floor, and the Masonic Hall is upstairs and so forth. But that's a very important building, and the ability to have input and involvement by people from the Masonic Lodge is critical to having this become a successful effort. Another piece of property is the one that's been kind of in the paper of late, which is the abandoned gas station. There was an effort made to put that, to change that from a gas station to a convenience store, as I'm sure you've read. You may or may not know that through some efforts of citizens in the town and so forth, there was further discussion. The Historic District, I think, did an outstanding job in terms of pursuing their regulatory role. And in the meeting last week, the petitioner agreed to withdraw the application at this point in hopes of working with the community, getting a better idea of what kind of design may be acceptable. I'm not sure it's going to be possible to kind of shoehorn the size of building that the folks that are proposing the convenience store can really accommodate. They're looking for 3 or 4, 4,500 square feet. I hope you can come up with some sort of a design, and we're trying to work with some folks in the center to try to craft something that would be acceptable from a business standpoint and also from a conformity with the historic village sense. But we'll see what happens on that. But at least for the present, there's more time that we've got to work with that particular piece of property. Hi, Paul. Thanks for coming.
Thanks, Paul.
Is there a seat there, or there's a seat right here at the table if you want to?
We're over here.
We'll get you sworn in. You'll be the acting. But other properties involve the apartment buildings there in the town, and the word was that they were potentially for sale. I've heard rumors that there's actually that could be in transition to a new owner at this point. I know nothing further than the fact that someone mentioned that they thought it was under agreement. The property next to the Masonic Hall is available for sale, and most people feel it's overpriced, and therefore it's sort of sitting there. But nevertheless, it's something that is critical in terms of the impact on the community. So anyway, won't spend a lot of time going through each parcel, but the point is that there are at least 4 to 5 parcels that currently are very important in terms of the long-term impact that whatever happens to them today will have on the community. So we'd like to hopefully be in some position at some point throughout next year to have some role in guiding that or helping that process along, or finding businesses that may be able to settle here if we can create the right kind of structure to accommodate them. So Paul Anastasio just walked in the room. He's a doctor of chiropractic here in Harwich Center. He has the health center on 124. Example of what one can do to an outstanding property. And Paul was a very major player in the prior effort at an initiative committee such as this. And so his experience and being a property owner and businessman in the town is very critical, and I'm glad he's agreed to join our forces here. Can you introduce yourself? I should know who you have.
Whoever I am.
No, Larry I know, but the gentleman next.
Craig Chadwick.
Okay, and,
Harwich Center resident and.
Oh, good.
member of the planning board, but I'm not here representing the planning board.
okay,
Full transparency.
perfect, okay. Well, that's excellent, and I know we have folks from the Housing Assistance Corporation here, and others. The Board of Assessors are represented, and certainly the Cape Cod Commission. We're glad to have Steve Tupper here from the meeting last month, and he's here today. So anyway, it's that kind of, I think, breadth that our organization is hoping to develop, and including, of course, 2 members of our esteemed Board of Selectmen, who we obviously need to work closely with the board as well. Both Ed McManus and Larry Ballantyne are here. So at this point, unless there's any other public comment or person would like to offer any thoughts, Paul, why don't you come at least sit here? You don't need
Come on,
to.
Paul.
Oh, sit in the chair.
No, take the chair.
This is your natural home.
Paul was on the earlier initiative. Lane was like the beginning of the beginning, going way back.
That makes me sound old.
The
Thank you.
first Howard Center initiative. I actually, when Paul suggested to me that we might think about it again, I said, well, this is going to be the 3rd time around, but. And I've resigned as chair of HDHC. That would be the Historic District Historic Commission, a job that I've loved and enjoyed for a lot of years. And I did that primarily because I have to put my strength into my business and also into my organization, Mid-Cape Church Homes. But as a stakeholder, as I said to Paul the other day, all of us are stakeholders in as much as this is our home, this is our community, this is our village. And about this village, I don't think you can say any more except it's an exceptional village. We have the loveliness of the Brooks Park and the library and Monomoy Regional School District. We at the other end have the Historical Society and the park. It is the most perfect village that needs love. That's
Okay, thanks, Greg. Anybody else have anything they wish to offer at this point? If not, we'll go to the next item on the agenda, which is the approval of the minutes of the last meeting. Ginny did a great job in getting those out to people. Hopefully they've had a chance to review them. And I would accept a motion at this point to accept the minutes unless.
So moved.
And a second. And any further discussion on the
Who was the second?
minutes?
I can't second.
Yeah, who was the second?
I'll
Oh,
second.
Okay. Okay.
Is there, Greg, is there another copy of those minutes? So that I can-
Sure.
Yeah, right here.
Yeah.
There's some agendas here too. I'll just put these down. Anyone else wants to come up?
Anybody else have a copy?
While we're doing that, has everybody signed the form so you'll get copies of all of this emailed and so forth? Any questions about the minutes as presented? Hearing none, I'll put the motion to a vote. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The motion is passed and the minutes are accepted. The next item for business here is the election of a more permanent chair. And at this time, I would open the floor for nominations. And I would place in nomination as chair Dan Wolf, our esteemed member of the board here, president of Cape Air and a former state senator in Massachusetts. Is there a second? Second. Are there any other nominations?
Is it inappropriate for me to request that possibly a second chair might be in order?
Well, I have a vice chair
Vice
coming up.
chair.
That role is,
Okay.
we'll deal with the chair first. Any other nominations? Hearing none, we'll close the nominations and cast one ballot, I guess. Why don't we put it to a vote? All those in favor of the motion for Dan Wolf to be chair signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And those opposed, nay. Ayes have it.
Dan?
I didn't, I abstained.
Mr. Wolf will be chairman of the organization, and I'll turn the meeting over to your direction.
There is a camera, so I can't say, is there a camera? You're sort of dumping this on me, but.
Well, we have a vice, we
So,
have a nominated
you know,
vice chair.
Oh, nominate the vice chair, yes. Would we have a nomination?
So do you want to, we have a nomination?
No, I'm asking you if there's a
Oh,
nomination.
no, we don't. We're looking for a nomination to be vice chair.
Yeah, I don't know if I can I make a, okay, I'll nominate Paul Doan. I don't know if I can, I don't know the Roberts rules, if I'm allowed to. Okay.
You can do
Go
that.
ahead. I know
Okay,
the
so-
chair can't, right, but, okay.
So we have a nomination, do we have a second?
Second.
Second.
Do we have any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
That's quite efficient.
Good.
Thank you very
It-
much. Thank
In my capacity as chair, I actually would like to turn the meeting over to be run by the vice chair.
Dan, good.
That was a,
That was good.
Paul, can I would
I'll
like,
act for
can I
this
make a,
meeting. No,
can I
that's-
make a comment as chair?
Yeah.
So, Paul and I have talked a couple times in the last week, and I am a huge believer in form following function. And one of my concerns taking over as chair is the form should follow the function. I'm not entirely 100% sure what the function is, because we haven't as a group, and I don't mean just the voting people, I mean the whole community, I think adequately articulated what the vision is. So as I said to Paul, thanks a lot, because Paul got the ball rolling. This is what, our third meeting. And now he's leaving for 6 months. And, I always think that, leadership is never about leading and seeing who's behind you following. Leadership is about harnessing consensus, creating a collective vision, and then figuring out a process to exercise that vision. But it always does start, at least at the beginning, with the person whose vision it is. So just because the title has come to me doesn't mean I have the vision that Paul has, and that's a huge concern of mine. Because, it's not like you have an exact vision of what should go where and how it should look. But I'm not exactly sure because and we're gonna certainly, if I'm running meetings, rely heavily on what has happened in the past relative to these initiatives. Because I need to be brought up to speed as do a lot of the other people in the room. But we need to understand what happened in the past relative to the initiatives, why and why not. And then there needs to be some kind of consensus around a vision. As I said at the last meeting, it's really hard to get stuff done, public, private, public sector, et cetera. It's impossible if there's not consensus. So if we're not one voice speaking for what we want to see in Harwich Center, there's no way it's going to work. We're going to have to garner outside resources, both public and private sector, and we're going to have to really organize and speak with one voice. So I'm concerned about that as being the de facto chair while you're gone, even though at every opportunity I'm going to defer back to my vice chair. So that having been said, that's a concern I'm going to voice at the beginning, is that the chair should really have a clear sense of direction. And I will be completely forthright and honest, I don't at this point. In spite of the fact that I love this town and that I've had my own vision driving through Harwich Center the last 34 years, albeit that's short in some time context. So I guess, I'd like to hear in this meeting or by the end of it, a real sense of what the chair of this committee should do to serve in that capacity as effectively as possible. Otherwise, I'll fail, and I'm not the one who's going to direct that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Or I could have just said, who am I and why am I here?
Well,
Don't sell yourself
I like
short.
what you said, Dan. Let me pose a slightly different view of what's going on, because I think many of us have been involved in some of the previous discussions. And I think that although we need a vision, I would hate to see this get bogged down on spending months and months of trying to figure out what the vision is. It's like the IBM fellow, years ago when they were asking about the vision, said, forget that, you need a day-to-day operation going. We need a consensus, but I'm hoping that your committee will come out with the top several priorities and pick one or two so that we can prove that we're moving forward. We may not solve world hunger at that point, but we can get some actions going. I hate to debate this forever and come at the end and not have something you can put your teeth into. And as a board, we tried to encourage that by putting a limit on this committee by the end of next year. And so somehow I encourage you, and I take you to saying that, but we need a consensus. But I would at the same time hope that you would move to pick a couple items that may not be absolutely sure that's what the consensus is, but it'll get us going. Because sometimes the best way of getting a concrete discussion what the going is make concrete suggestions.
Well, Larry, could I just, Mr. Vice Chairman, could I follow up on that?
Certainly.
It's kind of
I
odd
don't want to
because,
debate you, Dan.
no, it's not a debate. Absolutely not, Larry, and I thank you for your service and so many people in the room who have, in the past and present, are doing so many good things. It just, not to oversimplify, because I agree with you, we don't want to spend a lot of time talking about philosophy and concept. There are a number of properties in the village center, in the town center, that will fit, that need work or that need to be changed or that need to be affected in order to reach this vision. There's a role for the private sector as far as investment dollars. There's a role for the public sector as far as setting the table for those private dollars, whether it's infrastructure improvements or whether it's zoning or regulatory changes. That's how I see it. And so, I mean, that is agreeing with you in that this really isn't rocket science. The neat thing is it's a relatively small project. That doesn't mean easy. Easy and small aren't the same. But it's a handful of properties that there needs to be some kind of movement on, either with existing owners or new owners. And the town needs to be a partner because this isn't going to happen unless the town does what it needs to do. So that gets to your committees that you have suggested, I suppose, Paul? Is that?
Yes. It would, but as we found out last week, our last meeting, there's a strong view, and I respect that, and I'd like to think that they could be done simultaneously, but at least the priority is to get the input from folks who are so-called stakeholders as to what they see as priorities or needs or issues or concerns. And one of the things we had on the agenda here was a response to that request at the last meeting, which was to hold one or more open meetings to elicit information and feedback from the community that we would physically, and it's been suggested, which I think it makes a great deal of sense, to physically mail out invitations or at least alerts that we're having this meeting to the community in Harwich Center, the property owners, tenants, whatever may be the case, people who would have some input, and solicit that information. And maybe from those meetings, we would help to funnel ideas that end up being priorities. We could go around the room tonight, and get some input, which I would like to do as well. But one of the things that we're hoping to accomplish here is to put in place from tonight's meeting a follow-up session where townspeople could actually participate and or at least be requested to participate, and see what kind of feedback and information we can garner from that meeting. But first, let's, if I may, just go around the room here. We've got a discussion of committee priorities. What would you folks see as direction or areas that this committee could explore, or concerns that you have in the community right now that might be addressed in some way? I'll conclude by simply saying that I had felt that if a few subcommittees were working in areas such as regulatory issues or infrastructure issues, that could be done in tandem with what's going on in terms of soliciting feedback from the community. But whether that's the case or not, I know a priority is to have the meeting with the stakeholders, and we're prepared to proceed with setting that up tonight, setting up a date, figure out how this is physically going to happen. But in addition to setting up that meeting, are there areas that you'd like to see that we could?
So, Paul, I'm going to jump in on
Yeah.
kind of what we've
Okay.
talked about so far, because we just held the stakeholders last week for the cultural districts. As I mentioned last week when we were all together, the town is also in the process of getting 2 designations for cultural districts, Harwich Center and Harwich Port, and those are happening simultaneously. We just had 2 representatives from the State Cultural Council here with us last week. We found out what date they could do, and we pulled both districts in, one meeting in the morning with stakeholders and one in the afternoon. It's, as I stressed last week, and may have been taken out a little, upset a few people, but stakeholders are very, very important to this. And we had numbers come out that we were really pleased with for last week. These are the voices of what's going to help us pull this all together so that we can have these 2 things. Harwich Center, when I took over the role as the executive director, I realized and stressed wholeheartedly that we have 7 villages. Harwich Center will happen at the same time as Harwich Port, but you need to have people invested in it. We had 25 people last week come to the Harwich Center part with the state. It's really important to get those people involved out there.
How did you
Okay.
publicize that?
Cindy,
One,
How did you publicize it for people
So
from
it
Harwich
was-
Center?
So it was mainly through the members of the chamber that I had records of, as well as some emails, which I had your email from the town. It went out to you.
I have 2 properties in Harwich Center, and I didn't know about it, so
I will
sorry I
double-
didn't show
No,
up.
that's okay. I'll double check, because I actually got your email, because I didn't have it, from someone in the town hall.
Oh,
So anyone that we had that we could reach out to, we did. So certainly, but that's how. And I've mentioned them at a number of Board of Selectmen's meetings to have people reach out. If you haven't been contacted, please reach out. So, so yes, we had.
I didn't know
20
about it,
yeah.
so
Sorry about that.
That would be one reason why someone that
So-
represents a
so
big part of the center
just-
wasn't there.
Just for the understanding of everybody here, so the cultural district in Harwich Center physically goes from
So
the
it's going to
community
go
center.
From the White House Field
Yeah.
all the way to the cultural district, cultural center, sorry.
Yeah,
And we found out that, yes, in fact, we can do that. There's now they're calling it, it's a navigable district. So at first, when we met with the state, they had said we couldn't have it as far as we should start at Brooks Park. It's now officially being able to go and start at White House Field to the cultural center for Harvard Center and everything in between.
it kind of looks like one of those gerrymandered congressional districts. Snakes
You want to get
along the-
involved in that right now?
that the Democrat. So when you said the stakeholders that came, who
I wish I could remember everyone that was in the room.
Well, I would
were
like,
they people that
I
live
will get those
between the community center and?
Absolutely, yep.
are we
and
talking
what-
about real estate owners or
So
tenants?
I don't know that we had any of
This
the-
is important because in actuality, we can all sit here and debate this forever and ever and ever, but the people that actually own the real estate that is vital to our interests are the people that we need to involve. So when Paul refers to stakeholders, I think you are talking about real estate
I'm talking about the
tenants
owners
and
of the
or,
property, right,
okay?
yeah.
Right, for this, Greg, absolutely. And I think at last week's meeting that there were a couple of conversations about getting the list from the assessor's office. I know that Charlene also sent an email
I just
out
talked to
with
Charlene a
the
minute, yeah.
businesses that we had. So certainly those are the ones you should send the postcard to right away, say, okay, because those are the ones that are going to be in May with all of us at town meeting. And those are the ones, that's how we're gonna get anything done.
Okay, and was there a summary of this meeting in terms of the,
Actually, in this week's Chronicle, there'll be a full article. Bill Galvin was there, so you'll be able to see everything.
but how about a listing of priorities or concerns or something by those? Is that something that,
It was more discussing now that we were also happy with how far the district can go. That was a big, heavy, discussion, and it did change a little. So, it was more of an update from the state of where things were moving along and how we were, on track, but also that, the other 5 districts that are in the, running for this compact as well, they were now mirroring what Harwich is doing. So Harwich was kind of the shining star, which was nice to hear from the state.
and the eventual product of the effort is what? There's a
To have the
plan,
desi-
I know.
To have the designation of a cultural district.
Yeah.
It will have maps, signage, brochures. It's going to have a website that will be hosted on the chambers and directing to all the partners that are involved in the district.
And so ends up with signage and so forth for people visiting and that sort of thing.
We,
Okay.
Charlene and myself, the town planner, wrote a grant that we received for $10,000, and some of that will be going towards updates for the cultural center, as well as the signage and things that we need to start.
Good. Well, I know Charlene wasn't able to make the meeting tonight. She, I guess, has come down with some bug or something. Anyway, she went home early, but she did send to me the list of owners of some businesses that work through the Board of Health, yeah, in Harwich Center, to make sure they get informed of the meeting. And she was going to coordinate with the assessors department to make sure everybody is invited. Where was the meeting held?
We had one here in the library, and then Harwich Ports was down at my office at the
Okay.
chamber. It was a full day.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Vice
Right.
Chair. Okay. I wonder, would it be helpful to, I believe there was a study done a number of years ago, and you had referred to it, I think, when this committee or initiative was first proposed, that maybe has a foundation or there are parts that can still be used. So would that be, it sounds like we're having a hard time where we start. It's so big. We don't want to make it a 40-year project.
Right.
But would it be helpful to go through that document and whatever analysis was done and pick out those things that are still appropriate, or things that aren't on there that maybe should be because time has changed. I don't know how long ago that was done, but a good place
It
to
might be
start.
answer that, Paul, but-
The other thing, I attended a CPTC training program on planning with community support in my new role as a member of the planning board. And I don't have it electronically, but Charlene has it right now, and she's making copies for the planning board. It sounds like it might be helpful for this group as well. There are a lot of great ideas in there of how to get community support, how to get community involvement on committees, that type of thing. So I can touch base with her and we can share that, I'm sure, with you folks.
Very good, yeah. Well, to answer the first question, I did submit, what Charlene gave to me, what do you call those, thumb drives, that has all of the studies and efforts that have been made over the last, let's say, 20 years. And our esteemed clerk here took that thumb drive and actually dug up the reports and placed them on, which is another issue here of how we're going to organize all this information, but they're available through the website, and I'm hoping that maybe one of the tasks that I kind of envisioned us pursuing was to have a few people, one or two people that would look at those reports and see if there were things in there that A, applied to Howard Center, and B, seemed to be timely. Some of them, I think, tend to assume some huge amount of funds. Some of them are more straightforward, but I think it's worth having a clear understanding of what kind of efforts have been made in the past and what kind of recommendations were made. So one priority might be to assign some folks to review those documents and report back. That, if I can kind of paraphrase.
What might still be applicable,
Right.
what is no longer applicable, that type of thing.
Right.
Just as a place to start,
Yeah,
get some
there's
things on paper.
no need going over plowed ground if
Right,
it's already
right.
done.
If it's already done, and maybe it needs to be updated in terms of maybe traffic study numbers or something like that. I don't wanna go down a rabbit
Yeah.
hole. The other thing that I was gonna throw out was, would it be helpful to try to chunk the initiative in terms of years? I haven't heard anybody say anything yet about, actually, the senator did mention infrastructure. And I think all the efforts that we're talking about seem to be real estate and making the buildings prettier, opportunity for more investment in the
Business,
center
right.
in terms of business and residents and all those things. But if we don't deal with the infrastructure, we're not gonna
Yeah.
get the people there to enjoy those new businesses. And I think one of the first things I think of is the intersection between 39 and 124. And at some point in time, like it or not, I'm sure that traffic lights are gonna be required and left turn lanes are gonna be required. Not that I'm advocating Harwich Center become the intersection out by Stop and Shop, but in reality, and that may be 40 or 50 years down the road, but if we're gonna be doing things now, we want, and that is a goal for, you know, the out years, we ought to be doing our planning around that, thinking that, you know, as we plan out sidewalks, maybe we can plan them so that if we have to go an additional lane or whatever, just sort of brainstorming here. But to make sure that we're not gonna do things now, if we chunk it in 5-year plans, let's say, we're not gonna do anything in the next 5 or 10 years that we're gonna have to tear up or tear down or
Yeah.
change significantly when we have to put a traffic light in left turn lanes and all that kind of
Yeah.
stuff into that intersection.
Ginny?
Ginny, yeah.
I just want to say thank you before we get too far along, since I'm the clerk. Can I get your name again?
Oh,
sir?
sure, Craig, C-R-A-I-G, Chadwick.
Okay, thank you.
C-H-A-D.
I was looking down, I think, when you said it before. So, I did take all of the documents that Paul had been given on a USB drive. He couldn't open them because he's got an Apple device. So anyway, so I put them on Google Drive, and because the town's been working on the website, so only minor changes could be made. So they did make a new page for our committee, but as of, I'd say the middle of last week, I believe the update is that we can start adding more content, because what the Google Drive thing is great, but you need the link. And so if you haven't been on the list so far, then you haven't gotten it. But I will send that to everybody, again, if you sign in there. I'll send that out again. But as I have time, I want to start adding that onto the Howard Center Initiative page on the committee page on the website. Because a lot of that, there were not only the Howard Center Initiative in 2000, there were different, there was a 2009 study, and I want to say 2011 or 12, looking at traffic safety and pedestrians and curb, what do they call it, curb enhancements, the bump outs and those kind of things. So a lot of that work has been done with traffic counts.
And there is, that information is available now, because I found that.
It's-
Some of it's already
It's-
on the
it's-
website.
I
Yeah, but I still think it should be on our
Oh,
site, so you
sure,
go to one
sure.
place and we're gonna find them all. But it's just gonna be a process of adding all
If-
of that.
Just to back up on what Jenny was just discussing in the question that you were just asking, as a member, former member of each initiative, and you can tone in on any time you want to over here on this one, we worked incessantly, late into the night, and the goal was, as the goal is today, to try to bring vitality back to a historic little village. And the most important thing that I can see that was lacking in every single initiative prior to this one is the economic factor. Because if we don't have the business in the village, we really can't afford to improve the infrastructure that the Cecil Group, and that's what I think you were referring to, and you need to look at the Cecil Group maps. We paid, we received grant money, and the Cecil Group did a fantastic job for us, but basically when we turned it over to the community in the town, it was just as we are sitting here tonight saying, okay, this is great, it looks lovely, it's a vision, how are we gonna pay for it? And when Paul first came to me and had this discussion about reinitiating this group, I said, yes, maybe, but, and I think the economic factor is the most important factor of all. And Paul has made some really important considerations and comments, and one of them is that the traffic study, the traffic that runs through 28 in Howardsport, and I've always felt sorry in a way that Route 28 runs through Harwich-Port, and we haven't been able to divert it as Chatham was and be able to say, okay, and this is our center, because our center in Harwich-Port has always been a road from Hyannis to Chatham. And Paul brought up, and I think this is a very important thing to consider here, and we've done a little work on it, but not enough, and that's the traffic flow through Harwich Center is almost identical to the traffic flow in Harwich-Port. As many vehicles in a day pass through summer, July, or January, Harwich Center as pass through Harwich-Port, but there's no reason to stop in Harwich Center. We have put a stop sign, and we have a caution sign, thank God, finally at the library, but it's a village that people just run through quickly. And what we really need to do in considering this initiative now is to understand how we can lure interesting businesses to this village and slow down the traffic. That's
And that mainly worked for the Cape Cod Commission, which is I think another task is to have someone, maybe even the Cape Cod Commission, provide us, or have someone from our group spend time at the Cape Cod Commission and try to uncover all of the data that they have on hand there that might be helpful in either parking issues or traffic flow issues and so forth. Because one of the things you mentioned about routes and rerouting stuff, another infrastructure issue is obviously parking that is a concern.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not being
Yeah.
rude, I'm actually looking
No.
at what Ginny sent out. I'm just curious, how many people here have had a chance to look at what Ginny sent out? Because I mean, we all ought to look at it, otherwise we're simply gonna recreate what was done in
It's a really
2008 and again in 2012. I mean, this
Right.
verbatim, if we were to start this and nobody had seen it, I guarantee you, we would recreate in this room what was done, those two initiatives prior to this one. So that should be the starting point. It shouldn't be the finishing point. So Jenny, if you could send that out again, I mean, I'm opening it on my phone, so I mean, I don't think it's
There's a
impossible.
lot of files there, and
There are.
and some of them are more like just ideas or thoughts, kind of, you know. But there's some key studies there too.
Well, there's maps and picture, I mean,
Yeah.
it's pretty comprehensive because,
What I was also thinking would be a good idea, you know, because we're all at home, and I know I don't never even open up my laptop at home. I'm just looking at things on my phone, and that's tough to look at large documents. That maybe we just set up one large document at the library. If people don't want to print it out, they can come in and see it, you know, in a legible size.
Well, let's use those two topics, unless there's any, Richard.
You have got 3 business owners and residents of Harwich Center at the table right now. You've got a 4th member who works in Harwich Center. And I'd love to hear from them what are their top 3 issues and what they see as their top 3 solutions. Because you mentioned earlier on, you've got property on the market in Harwich Center right now, relatively cheap. And I know that the goal is to save and preserve some of those buildings, but one of those buildings that's for sale could probably provide parking for 35 to 40 cars. So I just look to say is, each of you, Paul, Lane, Greg, and Ginny, you 3 of you work and live there, 1 of you works there. What are the top 3 things that you see, and what are the top 3 solutions for your vision? That's a great way to start.
It's a very good question, and I was on the initiative before. That's why I'm just sitting here listening, because I agree with you. Boy, does it sound like the 20 years ago, the same meeting we were at.
Groundhog Day.
There are more people here, though. That's great, though. So one of the problems that we came across was the difference between us and down in Harwichport is we're historic. I know I own 2 of the oldest buildings in Harwich Center. And so you always have that as, I love that charm. I love that that's what Harwichport is about, Harwich Center is about. I don't want to lose that. But I think it's a deterrent for a lot of people to purchase in the center. Because if I want to put up a mailbox, I have to come and have it blessed by the Harwich Historical Society and then go to the building. So when I put a chimney that was falling down, I had to get it blessed, and you know, so those as a business owner, those are stumbling blocks. You talk about parking, well, you can park, but if you have nowhere to go, how much parking do you need? You know, if you really think about it, we have parking at the Historical Society that's never used. There's never a car in that parking. There's parking at the church. They use their business, call it the business, you know, the church uses their facilities at a completely different time from the rest of our businesses. I know there were discussions about removing the parking down Harwich Center. That's not going to work, for the reason you said. If you can fly down Harwich Center now, take away my obstacles, and believe me, I can go faster. And I'm going to bullet down there. As a business owner, you're going to take away the parking in front of my store. I have a lot of elderly people. They don't want to walk at all. They want the first 3 spots that are right out in front. Now, the building that's next, I own the center building, if no one knows what Cape Cod Works is. Ruggies, they are renters. The owners of that building are not Harwich Center people. They put big boulders up. There have already been 3 vehicles dented in the back of Ruggies now because it's very difficult for anyone to maneuver when they're trying to park. I can barely get a truck down there, and heaven forbid it snows this winter, because I'll guarantee you we can't plow. So if people want to talk about parking, they also at Ruggies need the property that's behind my store and behind my house. There's a little piece of land that 24 years ago I offered to buy, and they can't sell it to me because theoretically they need to own that land to have X amount of seats inside. So when people talk about putting a throughway behind my store, that's just another speed zone. Right now, they fly down Parallel Street because they think they're being clever by not going around that dangerous corner. But they fly down Parallel Street. There are no sidewalks down Parallel Street. Really poor visibility. The house that's on the corner of Sisson Road and Parallel Street was hit 4 times in the 24 years that I've lived here, right off its foundation. So probably not a great idea to put now a speed zone back on the other side. So I think, yes, looking at parking, but let's make it realistic. Let's make it where people can use it. Putting it behind us and making a concrete village is not historical looking. So on the one hand, you're saying if I own the building, I must keep it historical looking and time appropriate, but I'm gonna put pavement all around you, and it's not gonna be historical. So I agree that it's nice to have different types of businesses in, pull from different areas. Let's also look at what you've got around here. One of my concerns, and I like the people who run the business, but the convenience store, Harwich Center Market, it has gone from when my children were at Monomoy, they'd go there and they'd grab a Gatorade, against my will, before baseball, or they'd grab chips or whatever. Now the only thing my kids could probably grab in there is a bottle of vodka or a beer. There are a lot of nips. There are a lot of, what are we trying to bring into the center? With the apartments across the way, with that, I think we do need to look at what kind of businesses we want to bring in here and what's going to draw people into the center. I have to say, 24 years later, if I looked at this property, everyone said I was crazy at the time, too. They said, why did you buy that dump? Why don't you just knock it down? But I was the crazy person from Connecticut that already had a tile business, so I did it anyway. I don't know that I would buy in Harwich Center if I knew the housing across the way, the convenience store, and what's not there. If it was all gonna be concrete, and I knew what I would have to go up against with the historical, I don't know if I'd buy in Harwich Center.
So Richard Waystack, you opened up a discussion that's going to go on and on and on, but I'll just give you a real quick summary of my thoughts and backing up on what Lane had to say. The village has all of the infrastructure is already here. Link Hooper can tell me, I know for a fact that we don't have lines all the way down for parking in front here, but there was a time, and I was driving through Harwich Center specifically today because I wanted to look and make sure I'm accurate about this, but their street is laid out in such a fashion that there is parallel parking available all the way beyond the post office that used to be 02645 that lost the vitality of our village when it was moved. And the courthouse and the pharmacy and so forth and so on. This was a vibrant, cute village, and it's being lost. In my opinion, right now, parking is not the biggest problem that we have to overcome. I think honestly, we've got parking at Brooks Park, we've got parking at the Historical Society, we've got parking at the church. I'll let you park in my own place if you want to. I am a stakeholder. I made a huge investment in this town. I love this town. I've loved this town from the day I was born. My dear friend Paul's mom and dad stayed in my retirement complex. I mean, my grandmother worked with Paul's father all her life. There's a love that you have, and you all know it. You all know it. We just have to figure out how to bring the vitality back to this village. Something different that doesn't happen or hasn't happened in Howardsport, that we can make a change.
What do you see as one of the top 2 problems, and what do you see as the solution?
I wish if I could answer that solution problem, I can't. I think what would be interesting, and I have had some input down at Saquatucket, and I got involved with Bill Marsh a few years ago, and I kind of described to Bill what I didn't like. When you get on a boat in Nantucket, and you have this quintessential magnificent island and beautiful community, and then you come into Hyannis, it's like, I mean, it's pathetic. So what we've been able to accomplish with the initiative, and thank God for our harbor master for writing the grant and so forth, we have created now a place where people come and go. And I encourage my guests constantly to come and go from Harwich Port to Nantucket, because it's a shorter trip, it's a nicer trip, and it's more available. And parking's available. You don't have to go to the other side of the airport in Hyannis to park your car and take a shuttle. I mean, we have so much in this town that is just not been tapped yet, and there's room for more. I know galleries, as you asked, you know, when you get off the boat in Nantucket, that there's the wonderful little shacks of craft and so forth and so on before you even leave the docks. And that's part of what the idea was with the redevelopment of landside at Saquatucket. And getting the sidewalks from Saquatucket into Harwich Port is so imperative. But getting a sidewalk from Harwich Center to go around the culvert, where I'd like to build a covered bridge, honest to God. Honest to God, I know I sound like a fairy tale, but honest to God, there's a culvert there where you can't expand the road any wider, and I've talked with Amy about this, and it's not crazy. You could actually build a bridge, and then the sidewalks would be available for bicycles, to get the bicycles from the rail trail to Harwich Port. There's a million
In a short
things.
version, what I would say is, I think it's more important to have people be able to walk or take their bicycles and clean up our sidewalks, because I can't touch my sidewalk and there's a huge pothole in front of my store, than it is to figure out where people are going to park their car. If someone could walk, and one of the stumbling blocks we came across, which I just had to stop going to the meetings, was, well, you're historic, if you want to do the sidewalks, you have to be able to have 2 wheelchairs wide, and then the grass in case someone fell off out of their wheelchair on both sides, which leaves you barely room for a car, leads you to what is your long-term projection. There's got to be a balance between a historical building. It was built in 1780. It is what it is. If I made it handicap accessible, my ramp would be way across the street. That is what it is. I do have people that come into my store. I can accommodate them on the first floor. But if we really made those sidewalks that wide, we couldn't get a car down the middle. Could we get people to draw people? We have a wonderful bicycle path. Some of the money could come from that. As a business owner, I asked long ago, why don't we have a ladder? Why can't I put my name out there that says, this way, Cape Cod Tile Works? And you can sell those spots. It's a little bit of money, but it's a place to start as far as residents are concerned. You've got a wonderful business that happens to be right there, but you know, to be able to publicize that and to draw that, you can barely walk or bring your bicycle from the bicycle path into Harwich Center. To go from the library down here, it's not inviting. It's not, you don't necessarily want to go from the library and grab a sandwich at Ruggies or at Red's, and that's unfortunate. So I think it's more important to have sidewalks, and have sidewalks that are not rickety and not going to cause us to be sued down the road, than to have parking.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, ma'am.
Listening to us, the one thing I think you were missing, are you including the historical committee in any of these discussions? Because that's where it stops.
Exactly.
Yeah, well,
And don't get me wrong, I
asked for-
love Harwich Center.
asked for a representative to serve as a liaison, and they've indicated interest, but then they also, the indication seems to be, well, they don't want to get into a conflict there where they're in an awkward spot as a member of the commission and also working with us. So that's been a little more difficult to fill. There is a member on the Historic District Commission who technically has agreed to be a member of our organization, yes.
The reason I asked is we're going after replacing the existing sidewalks, not expanding them.
Okay, in the past, every time, when we've come up against this, and we've wanted to replace, and we talked about, you know, what kind we would put and all of that, you get into then historic, and you get into handicap accessibility. At the time, and unless things have changed, the only two buildings that are handicap accessible, up to total code for handicap accessible, would be the library and the church.
And the Harwich also.
And your center, that's true, yes. Thank goodness.
And the 2 handicap units that I just built.
And town hall. But the buildings within this, the Three Sisters on that side, and the, what used to be the hardware store, Odell's, across the street, those are very, it's not that we can't put a ramp, but they're not up to code for handicap accessibility. And that's where we kept hitting this,
Well-
this roadblock.
I think what seems to be the prevailing issue here is that maybe our regulatory climate is discouraging. Maybe the zoning bylaw, maybe the Historic District Commission. I mean, you have to kind of sense that where the Historic District Commission provides some merit in some places, it can be a difficult step
Oh,
to
it definitely
maneuver
does. I mean, I
around.
love the charm of Harwich
But-
Center.
I'm kind of concerned about the time here. I don't want to keep people unduly late, and I'd like to make sure we get something in place before we depart today.
Well, Dick asked me to throw my 2 cents in, and I'll do it real quick. But Lane had a lot of great things to say, and Greg too, and I really mirror them. So I do think that the biggest, one of the biggest problems in the center is that it is the sidewalk situation, and that it's not easy to walk and get around. We have something that Harwich Port doesn't have, which is the bike path, and that is a huge artery of people that are coming in. And if we can attract them into the center and have them get off their bikes and walk around, and they see a fine dining experience, and they see art galleries, then they go, hey, let's come back here later on tonight. And I think that would be a wonderful way to attract people into the center. I don't know how much input we have on what we can say, what type of businesses that we want in here, because I don't see enough variety in the center, enough of a draw to make it a destination. I mean, I've got a health center. If your back hurts and you need a massage or, you know, diet counseling, you come, you find me and you come. Nobody, you know, walks out the door and then says, okay, I'm gonna walk, you know, down into the center and then go to the ice cream shop, or something else that will attract them to make this place a destination. So I think that's what we need to do. And I'm not sure, Larry and Ed, maybe you can talk on this, is how much input we would have, how much control do we have as to what type of businesses will go in here? I mean, do we have that?
No,
Have that authority?
I'll put my 2 cents in on that. I agree with you on all that, but I think if we take the Cecil plan and look at the plans we had before us, they had great ideas, but what's missing on that is what's the next step to make it, to go forward? And I think that's where discussion is here, because you look here and take these problems and to say, okay, are there things we should be doing as a town for zoning? To become, in the state language, more of a smart village where you have housing and businesses that draw people in. Are there actions that we should be taking on wastewater? To link, maybe we can move that up and link earlier so we can get, a nicer restaurant in town, some combination of things going on. I think, as you said, if we take that as a starting point, it takes the next step and say, from a community and town aspect, are there things, I just mentioned a couple that we can address and try to go after that. We can't control the businesses, but at least we can make it possible, and regulatory issues. You know, you mentioned, Elaine, about the handicap. Well, some of that's related to how we get our grant money. You know, it's a state road grant that requires us to do the 2 sidewalks, we're trying to that. You know, we're doing one road, I think Lower County Road, we're intentionally avoiding grant money so we can improve the sidewalks on one side. You know, there are options to move ahead on that. So I think your direction you're going is take the CISA report and then take the next step, at least from the town side, then there's the economic side too, you know, like what can we do to help get business in? There's some actions we can take that will move us. At least set the stage where people are attractive.
Do you honestly think we could create sort of a micro zoning for Harwich Center, it being a very small piece of the last
We don't
commercial
know till,
village?
zoning is always a battle, so we won't know till we try.
Sometimes I wonder why we get bogged down with zoning. And I will take all of the blame, you can give it to me, about the Historic District Commission 35 years, and the reason that the Historic District Commission and the Historic District exists as it does. And I will be perfectly honest with you, David Spitz and myself worked together for 3 years to prevent Cumberland Farms from doing what they did to Harwich Port, which is, in my opinion, despicable. And when I drive through the village, I can't even believe it. I used to own 571. My parents used to own 570 Main Street, and you look at it now, and it looks like any boulevard off any exit on any highway. And in as much as the building is fairly attractive, but getting the gasoline tanks and island and all that to the side or to the back of the building, oh, they didn't want to hear about it. And, it was complicated. But I will tell you this, honest to God, I know it's the truth. That property that's sitting here waiting to be developed is sitting there because HDHC put bylaws in that said you cannot have a canopy in Howard Center. It's a historic district. And the man that bought the real estate didn't know at the time, and he bought it at a gamble, and he tried to put a canopy up. A gasoline station in Harwich Center has to have an attendee. What we've done for the historic district is very good, and I will stand up for it until the day I die. I absolutely, completely believe and concur. I've worked with Bob Doan. I've worked with so many people with the Harwich Initiative, the first time, the second time, and the third time around. I will admit to every one of you, I built the Winstead Inn with the zoning bylaws and restrictions that were created through the Historic District Commission and the Harwich Center overlay that allowed for bulk and size, because a building of the size of my building wouldn't have been allowed under current zoning bylaws, but in the village of Harwich Center, it was allowed. And it was the first building permit that was issued under the new zoning guidelines. And I don't know if any of you are offended by it, but that's what I'd like to see in the center of Harwich.
Paul.
Dan?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, some of the most vibrant villages and successful economic stories on Cape Cod are in some of the highest regulated areas relative to historic district and zoning. I think it's important to recognize that. I'm not saying we don't need to change it, and I'm not saying the regulatory issues are not issues, but really what happened to all of the villages on Cape Cod and to all of those vibrant areas that we want to recreate is big box stores, Route 134, and alternatives that actually made the businesses that used to be vibrant in the village centers not viable anymore. And what we need to do is accept that reality and revision what this needs to look like so that the businesses that are here are viable. They're not going to compete with what killed the businesses that were here. What I think from a process standpoint, so we don't just do this again, is to get the key players into a room. And I totally, I love what Richard said. Let's ask the people who are there every day, thinking about this every day, what it is that they vision, what kinds of businesses can be successful here. And then I would love, as a business person on the Cape, to get together with a few other business people in the chamber and go sit down and talk to, whether it's restaurateurs or whether it's galleries, and try to get the ones who are successful on Cape Cod to take a look at this. Instead of trying to throw a broad net and not bringing in anybody, let's target the net and go after the people that we want. But, as the chair now, I have no idea. I don't live here every day and work here every day. I could do that on Route 132 in Hyannis, which, by the way, is a bigger challenge, because that's where I go to work every day, and that's what I'm thinking about. So I would love to harness the people who day in and day out are here and thinking about it, get a vision, and then I promise you, we could come up with a different strategy to, in a very targeted way, try to approach this. And Richard is a very successful real estate. You know all the players. And we could maybe we'll strike out, but at least we'll know we struck out. Instead of wondering why no one's knocking on our door, we should go knocking on theirs. As far as the zoning and stuff that we need, once we get the business people or the investment or the private sector engaged in wanting to do something, that's when we got to go and ask for the change. Because that's when we can go and say, look, we'll have a restaurant if we have the wastewater capacity here. And maybe it's a cluster wastewater facility. It's not necessarily tying into a big system. There are a lot of ways to tackle this that are innovative and modern. But I mean, I'd like to start with having an hour and a half just to do what Richard said and invite the people, all of whom will have great observations and great experience and great history and great ideas, understand what it is we want to do, and then try to harness that energy, bringing in the right people to do it. So, I mean, I'm all about, these meetings where we let, the public come and speak. I'm not saying we shouldn't do that. Maybe we should do both. But I want to sit down with, like, the key people who have a history here and really hear where we want to go. So, I don't know how we do that.
Well, I don't know if that runs counter to the thought of having stakeholders, because obviously stakeholders are probably a bigger entity than maybe what you're referring to, but.
Well, everybody's a stakeholder who drives through Harwich Center. I mean.
Yeah. So why don't we go back to the point that was raised at the meeting last time of firming up a date and time and plan to get this input, and Lane may choose to attend or not attend, but anyway, she would attend and I would attend, or other stakeholders would attend.
Could I just modify that a bit?
Yeah.
What I would ask if I'm going to facilitate a process, and that's really, we're talking about facilitation, we're not talking about my agenda, is for the people who are here to reach out to their neighbors, invite them to a meeting, have like 10 or 15 people there, and I'd like to hear what you think needs to happen and what kinds of businesses will round out Harwich Center to make it vibrant.
But Dan, if you do that at the level of the key stakeholders,
Yeah.
okay, the owners and the businesses,
Yep.
and you predicate that meeting on, what are the 3 issues facing Howard Center? What are your 3 solutions? Limit people to 5 minutes of speaking, so you get in the same group, and the same business owners who've worked darn hard, and frankly, the 3 people who are there have put substantial private investment
Huge.
into Howard Center. That's what happened 25 years ago to Howard Sports. It wasn't the town making the change. It was the private investment that came in. Greg spent millions of dollars in his. Lane and you have fallen yours. Each of you put your private funds to make it more viable. The key stakeholders at a meeting have an agenda. Here, what are the 3 issues? What are the 3 solutions? Each person has 5 minutes to share it. Then you take the next step with the real key stakeholders in Howard Central alone.
Is there anybody here who thinks that what Richard is suggesting is not a good idea?
I think it's a fantastic idea.
All right.
I always love Richard's idea.
Will you help facilitate that?
Ed?
Earlier on, we talked, there's been the studies, the Cecil Group studies, and they assessed the sort of infrastructure, public infrastructure as it stands now, and made suggestions on how it could be improved and a variety of things. And that was done in 2002 and 2003. In 2004, the Harwich Center Initiative Committee at the time was moving on applying for the next step, which was the market study, the sort of economic development study grant, and had been working to position itself with the housing and community development to be a very attractive community to qualify for it. And they created basically a round of funding that was aimed at small villages like Harwich Center, because all of the small villages like Harwich Center always seem to lose out in the funding rounds, going up against downtowns like Hyannis and other areas around the state. And so we had started putting together information. We recruited a consultant to work, and the $2,500 cost, he was going to help put the document and the application together. We submitted it to the town meeting. The Board of Selectmen at the time decided that it was inappropriate for a public committee to delve into market studies and those things that should be the purview of the private sector. And so they pulled the funding. So we kept on and we made the application by ourselves. It was not deemed up to snuff, and there were some problems that we ran along the way, issues that the volunteer committee weren't aware of, that a professional would have been, and that's sort of where the whole effort came to a screeching halt, quite honestly. But so it's at this point to see that the group seems to think that the missing piece in the discussion is that discussion of economic development, what sort of market we have is very hard.
Okay, well then let's determine a date and zero in on at least the first meeting of maybe two, but at least start with one, and specifically contact the so-called stakeholders, the residents, the business owners in the Harwich Center area, and have them, like the cultural district did, have them come to a meeting and get this 2 or 3 priorities that they have. We'd make that as part of the invitation, that we would like people to come armed with specific priorities or concerns that they have, and use that and whatever flows from that to establish priorities for us. I envision that either parallel with that or subsequent to that will need to be the effort to see if we can stimulate some economic activity to complement whatever else is offered, because that's a key part, as other people have, everyone here today has mentioned. So, with that in mind...
May I just ask one quick question?
Yes, sir.
How many stakeholders do we have in the room tonight? People who own real estate in Harwich Center. Okay, okay. John represents the Masonic Lodge. Paul Anastasio, Lane. This, I think, is the most important of all. Get the stakeholders into these meetings so that they can discuss it. Why should we be sitting here as a group of individuals and concerned about something that we can't do anything about if the people that own the real estate aren't involved? That's important.
Well, we can certainly ask the members of this committee to verbalize that, or to write or comment or whatever, or participate. But I think in addition to the folks here, we have to reach out and see if there are others in the community that have a view on this. And I think the only way we'll do that is, as has been mentioned by Richard and others, is to have this public meeting, which I think if we can set a date and go from there, I'll make sure we get the list, current list, addresses, and request that these folks that do attend come prepared with whatever their priorities are or concerns are.
Are Mondays bad because there's the selectmen meetings? Mondays are not good nights?
Yep.
Because I think that's the room to do it in, right?
If you
Right.
bring a sandwich, I'd be okay.
I'll bring you a
And
sandwich.
the-
Mondays are good for me.
So how about,
And the other issue that we
Well,
might...
let's get the date down so we can just get on, because
Okay.
we're gonna
Tuesdays?
lose people here.
Tuesdays good?
6:30.
I think Mondays, you know, maybe if you start at 4:30.
You gotta do it in so people who are working
Yeah.
can get there. 4:30, I was late tonight because I was still working.
Yeah.
couldn't
Yeah, I
get
agree
there.
with you. I agree with you, Richard. I agree with you. I agree with you. Yeah.
Then move it to Tuesday.
One of the other biggest stakeholders in town, don't forget, are you, Mr. McManus, and you, Mr. Ballantyne, as selectmen, because most of the real estate in this village is municipal.
So what are we deciding on? Tuesday?
how about Wednesday, the 16th of January? She can't make Tuesday.
can't make
She-
Tuesday.
she can't be there.
Wednesday.
Wednesday,
Wednesdays I
the,
can
Wednesday
do
work.
Monday,
Can we have the
Wednesday,
big meeting
Wednesday.
room on Wednesday?
need to go downstairs, they got a calendar, and it's
Yeah.
different colors, what days are available.
Yeah.
Just pop next door and see Chris or Evan and say, we were looking for the 16th at 7 o'clock, 6 o'clock, whatever you want, and have them do it for you.
And I agree with you, 5 o'clock is really tough for people who work.
You want
Larry,
5:30?
are you going in the
5:30.
next room
I
there?
am.
Can you just see if that's available from
Well,
Evan?
they won't know, we have to check with Sandy.
Oh.
She's a
Have
calendar,
Chris check with you.
she's a calendar.
I'll-
I mean,
I'll-
Chris
I'll-
will check too.
I'll go down tomorrow morning. I'll go down and check on it.
Tentatively, you should be, it's good.
Okay.
Show of hands for 5:30 versus 5.
Richard, raise your hand, 5:30 versus 5, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
It's better than 7.
So we're talking about January,
5:30 is better.
what's the date?
17th?
They go
Is
home
that-
first, they won't come
Is
here.
that the
You
date,
That's
Dan?
right.
Yeah,
17th?
it's the 16th, Wednesday the
16th.
16th.
16?
Is that-
And you want 5:30?
Okay, we'll go that route.
I did
5:30?
want to make
5:30.
dinner for my family though, before-
That is.
All those in favor?
Aye.
That's what it is. We'll give it a try, and if that date proves bad, we'll
And still having one of them.
have to revise it.
He's in high school.
But still, he
Okay,
can-
Folks.
Thank you, thank you.
But he's mass quantities of food.
Thanks for
So
your
moved.
time.